end up, there are shellings everywhere. There's probably some kind of base there, and all the positions have been hit everywhere.
On August 15th, something terrible started in Crimea. This is fucked up. Ukrainian Neptunes attacked 3 nuclear airfields in Crimea. Everything is burning.
Yeah, no way. Absolutely no way at all. No way. I just can't believe it.
Boom. Easy, easy, easy. Are you filming?
Yeah!
Unbelievable. There were explosions in Sevastopol, Simferopol, and Yevpatoria in the Bakhchisarai district, Alushta, Feodosia, Saky, and Novofedorivka. No way. The airfields at Saky, Hvardiiske, and Kirovsky are on fire.
Now that's an explosion. How is that possible?
The Ukrainian armed forces have launched powerful special operations in Crimea to destroy Russian military personnel. The nuclear triad is under attack. The Black Sea Fleet, airfields, and oil refineries.
Fly. Fly. Fly, damn it. It's your turn. Give the order or all our people will die.
Crimea burned last night. 4 key military airfields were attacked.
Where does the strategic nuclear industry take off?
That's fucked up.
Saky, Hvardiiske, Kirovskaya. Strike against aviation. 200 drones attacked Crimea last night. The drones' targets were the Saky, Hvardiiskaya, and Kirovskaya airfields. NASA satellites have detected a large-scale fire near the Hvardiiskaya airfield in Crimea. At the Crystal oil depot in Engels, another fuel tank caught fire. The whole city is covered in smoke. As they say, the show must go on, or the action at the Crystal oil depot in Engels has been going on for several days now. Meanwhile, Russia has lost another Su-25. Special operation forces have destroyed a decision-making center in the Kherson direction. And also the headquarters of the Russian forces in Makivka was attacked and blown up. We will discuss all this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svitan. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Good health.
Roman Grigorievich, let's start with the hell in occupied Crimea, because more than 200 drones attacked 3 key military airfields, Hvardiiske, Saky, and Kirovske. Novofedorivka was also attacked. The floor is yours.
Novofedorivka is a depot near Saky. So basically, Novofedorivka and the Saky airfield are part of the same complex. The strike on Crimea today was truly large scale. This is something we've repeatedly requested, let's put it mildly, on air, because we kept circling around Crimea but never touched it. It was like a sacred cow. Honestly, today was a well-executed, effective attack. Indeed, 200 drones can overwhelm any air defense system, any at all. Thanks to the large number of decoys, the Russian forces, at least the air defense units, used up their missiles today. And yet, significant damage was still inflicted on Russian airfields in Saky, near Simferopol, and of course, near Sevastopol. But drones also reached Kerch. There are 2 airfields located there that are currently being prepared, I would say, as primary launch sites for new batches of Geran 2 and Geran 3 drones. And these 2 airfields were also attacked, at least as of now. The operation was well thought out, excellently executed, and most likely carried out by our army. That is, this is not a special operation, but rather army work. You could even say it was already under the command of Magyar, the new commander of the Unmanned Systems Forces who has just taken office. Although in reality, of course, it should be our sailors working in Crimea, that is the Navy, the naval forces. Within the naval forces, there should be their own Magyar, their own sailor Magyar, who will create unmanned systems forces specifically related to the maritime domain, underwater, surface, and aerial, for the liberation of Crimea. If today's attack is not a one-off but systematic, then believe me, by the end of the year, at least half of the Russians in Crimea will simply disappear, just vanish. Because if this happens every day, even with just 100, even 100 drones targeting airfields first, definitely. Why airfields? The Russians use airfields in several ways. First, as bases for tactical or army aviation. That means airplanes and helicopters. Second, they extensively use the airfield grounds to strategically deploy anti-aircraft missile systems and advanced radar units of the Russian Federation's radio-technical troops, thereby enhancing their defensive capabilities. And third, they use almost all airfields as transit depots for transferring ammunition. That's why, for us, it's especially important first and foremost to destroy the airfields and everything on them. Airfield technical equipment, vehicles, ammunition, and of course the aircraft themselves.
Roman Grigorievich, I wanted to talk to you about aviation. Meanwhile, dear audience, please like this video. In the comments, what you think the successful operations of the Ukrainian armed forces and the idea that Crimea should burn military facilities and that Russians should swim backstroke and freestyle to Russia. Roman Grigorievich, can we assume that at these airfields that were attacked last night, enemy aircraft were also targeted? Or did we only strike the fuel facilities there? What do you think?
Well, Russian aircraft are not stationed at all of those airfields right now. They have mostly pulled back to the central and western airfields. The eastern airfields in Crimea. That's why some of the airfields are used by the Russians either for army aviation, for helicopters as forward operating bases, so-called forward operational airfields, or for deploying anti-aircraft missile systems and radio technical troops. So for us, this is very important in order to deliver serious strikes against Russian aviation. But to do that, we first need to achieve air superiority. That begins with destroying ground-based surveillance and response systems, meaning those same anti-aircraft missile systems. That's what started today. The thing is, such operations have already started several times before, but then they were cut short. It's as if by the wave of a magic wand. How many times have we already said, well, here it is, the beginning. And then suddenly it stops again for a month and a half, 2 months, and no one even glances at Crimea, at least not sideways. Well, now I'm just afraid to be mistaken once again. If this is the beginning of the liberation of Crimea, then attacks like this should happen every night. Every night, 100 drones should be entering Crimea.
Roman Grigorievich, regarding the SPU special operation, Novorossiysk, and also the missile carriers. We see that during massive missile attacks, missile carriers go out into the Black Sea. As far as I understand, they hide them in Novorossiysk and bring them out to sea on the necessary days. Question: how can we attack all the missile carriers today so that the Black Sea fleet ceases to exist?
Well, they have up to 100 ships and submarines left. Both submarines, there are 4 of them, and surface ships are missile carriers. Well, at least the carriers of caliber missiles. The submarines mainly carry 4 caliber missiles each, loaded in their torpedo tubes. As for the ships, they can have 4, 6, or even 8. Well, it depends on what kind of launcher is installed. A few months ago, our banking company, together with the Saudis, pledged not to strike Russian oil refineries, the Russian oil industry, and among other things, the Black Sea Fleet. That's why they now feel right at home, so to speak, at least in the eastern waters of the Black Sea. So here the question is, first of all, for the politicians. Well, actually, not even for the politicians. Now the question is for the security services. Why haven't they yet arrested for treason those politicians who ensured the safety of the Russian hydrocarbon sector and the Russian Black Sea Fleet? The Russians leave the base, say Novorossiysk, and go out to sea only to avoid being hit. That is, when they enter the base, it's a compact area with a high concentration of Russian ships, so they leave to avoid being targeted, and then naturally return mainly for maintenance purposes.
If we analyze whether Ukrainian special services could carry out something similar, but only on Russian territory, do our capabilities match theirs? Let's discuss this.
Well, from a military standpoint, the preparation and execution of the operation were at the highest level. Special services were involved, including Mossad and several other Israeli intelligence agencies, plus the Air Force. Again, pay attention, the main thing here is the Air Force, meaning long-range strike capabilities. About 200 fighter jets or various types of aircraft took off and struck previously identified targets. Moreover, the air defense systems had been practically neutralized beforehand by a Mossad special operation. So it was a combined attack, well thought out, well prepared, and well executed. But that's from a military perspective. It's roughly like discussing whether the executioner's axe that beheaded some king was well sharpened. Well, yes, it was well sharpened, no doubt about that. But the question is, why was there a need to behead at all? That's a different question, a different aspect altogether. The fact is, Israeli strikes on Iran at this point will ignite a war in the Middle East, and that will affect us as well. At the very least, first of all, it will hit us by driving up oil prices. Right now, the price of oil has already risen by more than 10%, and it could go up by as much as 30%. In other words, oil could rebound to $100 per barrel. That means Russia would receive twice as many petrodollars as before. there had been a trend toward falling oil prices, a trend toward a decline in Russia's economy. Now everything is the complete opposite, a full 180 degrees. There will be a rise in oil prices, a rise in the revenues of the Russian hydrocarbon sector, and naturally, an increase in the production of military equipment, the purchase of ammunition, and the mobilization of new recruits. So the war in the Middle East will hit us very hard through the surge in Russia. And at that moment, when it was necessary to destroy the Russian hydrocarbon sector, our banking cabal shielded Russian oil and gas facilities from strikes by our intelligence services and our army. How can we counteract this? By reactivating the Malyuk-Budanov sanctions mechanism. The most effective sanctions against the Russian oil and gas sector are its complete destruction. All the more so, it's practically begging for it, to destroy it, so that finally, yes, even Russian partisans are doing this. Well, we can see how they set fire to forests where Russian oil pipelines run, how they set fires, even as we mentioned, in the Far Eastern Ukrainian People's Republic, in Komsomolsk-on-Amur, which is actually Duenar, our so-called green wedge. An oil refinery was burning there.
Roman Grigorievich, why is it that what can be done with Iran can't be done with Russia today?
Well, first of all, we have nothing to do it with. Believe me, if we had the means, some of our agencies would have done it long ago. We don't have missiles, we don't have ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, even though we should have them in a missile-producing country like Ukraine, and there are no missiles. Well, it's both laughable and tragic. This is a question for the authorities, for all the authorities. In over 30 years of our independence, we ended up without missiles during Russian offensive operations. So this is something that can only be done by us. It's something we have to do ourselves. Us, no one is going to do anything for us, and there's no point in asking anyone. We have to do this and strike at the Russian leadership, including those who are where? In the Kremlin. How long have we been talking about the Rublyovka bathhouses and the Kremlin? 3 years now. What should we be? How should we be? And with what? Strikes on certain Iranian military targets. Well, first of all, nuclear facilities. Well, it's not that easy to reach a nuclear facility. Oh, for example, the facility that was attacked by the Israelis is buried more than 50 meters underground. You can't just reach it like that. That's one. And second, above this facility, above the centrifuges and the reactor, there's an 8-meter thick layer of concrete. So they really prepared thoroughly there. So if we're being realistic, Iran's nuclear facilities weren't actually damaged. The Bushehr plant, for example, runs on Russian fuel and wasn't touched in this regard. There are about 5 or 6 Iranian facilities, and for most of them, they only tried to hit one, but even then they only managed to strike from above. But inside, everything is still operating as it was. The centrifuges are still spinning. And what will Iran's response be? Well, who knows? Especially now, since Pandora's box has been opened. That is, there was a strike on a nuclear facility, so now Iran could retaliate with nuclear waste of the same kind after all. If they take the waste out of Bushehr now, and Israel gets covered with strontium and cesium, then as far as I know, you won't be able to live there for 24,000 years because of the cesium. And if they hit with uranium-235 or uranium-238, one has a half-life of 700 million years and the other 4.5 billion years. So can you imagine what would happen to Israel in that case? So again, who will end up suffering? The Zionists will run away, they'll flee to the United States, and it will be the ordinary Israelis left behind who will have to deal with this radiation. These are things that simply cannot be allowed to happen. Strikes on nuclear facilities are absolutely unacceptable, in principle, a priori. There are certain international control mechanisms like the IAEA, and it has been granted access there on some points. Recently, the continuation of the 2015 agreement was almost ready, again under IAEA supervision together with the Europeans. That's why the Israelis carried out a preemptive strike solely to preempt the agreement with Europe and the IAEA. In other words, they didn't give Iran the opportunity to sign this agreement. If the agreement had been in place, as it was from 2015 to 2018, the IAEA would have had full control over all stages of uranium enrichment. And so now the Israelis have actually, or rather, the Israelis have created a problem for ordinary Israelis. And what the response will be, well, it's hard to say right off the bat. But the Iranians aren't simple people either, believe me. There are at least an order of magnitude more of them, at least in terms of numbers. And no one is going to forgive things like this. So ahead, lies a serious bloody war, which for us, it's negative. It hasn't brought us any positives and it won't. Why? Because the Shaheeds that everyone talks about, Iranian and so on and so forth. The Chinese Sunflower 200, the Russian Geran is not an Iranian Shahed. The Russian Geran is the Chinese Sunflower 200. No matter how many military facilities you destroy in Iran, the Russians will keep assembling the Chinese Sunflower 200 from Chinese parts, calling it Geran, and they'll continue to do so. If you're going to call for strikes on the main factories, on production sites, then it should be the Chinese ones. Are the Israelis going to fly to China to destroy Chinese factories? This is something our intelligence agencies should be doing. These are questions for our intelligence agencies.
Dear audience, please like this video. Let us know what you think in the comments. We're returning to our main headline topic, Russian aggression, the war Russia is waging against Ukraine. Roman Grigorievich, regarding the oil depot, for example, at the Crystal oil depot in Engels, another fuel tank has caught fire. The whole city is covered in smoke. Essentially, drones attacked the oil depot on the night of June 5th to 6th, but the fire still hasn't been put out. Let's assess the situation.
Well, first of all, this isn't just an oil depot, or rather, it's not an ordinary oil depot. If we're talking about oil depots, the Russians have thousands of them. In reality, these are the fuel and lubricant storage facilities of the Engels 2 backup aviation airfield. And it's precisely in this capacity that it is very important to us. This is a supply depot, the main base and main storage for aviation kerosene. It's underground, located in karst caves, in caisson reservoirs. In other words, just try to get there. There are tens of thousands of tons of kerosene stored there. So from this underground reservoir, the fuel is pumped into the supply base, into the crystal, and then, well, is it a base or a warehouse? Fuels and lubricants, we call it a fuels and lubricants warehouse. From there, it is used to refuel those same aircraft. And the point was chosen correctly, where at least the main flow could be cut off. Of course, they also have a backup option where they can refuel directly from the caissons. But I think we'll get to those as well. So this strike on the fuels and lubricants warehouse was excellently executed, precisely calculated. We discussed with you before how the attack was carried out. They broke through the Russian air defense frontally using a large number of decoy drones, and the strike drones got through, took out the target, and set 3 tanks on fire at once, right from the start. And until it burns out completely, this won't stop. Kerosene is an interesting product. You can actually use it to put out fire. If you take a bucket of kerosene and pour it on a fire, it actually puts the fire out. But it's the kerosene vapors that burn. And if you heat kerosene up to a certain temperature and then ignite the vapors, which is what happened when our drone struck, then it's almost impossible to put it out. And they don't even try to extinguish it. They just step aside, dig a trench around it, and watch until it all burns out. And as long as it hasn't burned out, it will keep burning. It could keep burning for another month.
Roman Grigorievich, today's news. Russia has lost another Su-25.
Well, most likely these losses are due to technical issues. The Su-25s are already 40 years old. They've been flying since the Afghan war, since the 1980s. They were good aircraft, even excellent for their time when they were built. A solid attack aircraft. But now they're old, really old grandpas, I'd say. And technologically, of course, they're falling apart. And there aren't that many airframes left when you can only make 1 out of 2 or 3. So this fleet of aircraft the Russians have is dwindling. And even when they go down like today, when a Russian plane was lost.
Roman Grigorievich, over the past 2 days, we've also attacked the Moscow region. There were military targets there. Roman Grigorievich, what exactly was attacked near Moscow in the last few days? Because the drones didn't reach Moscow, but explosions were heard near Moscow. They say those were military targets.
Approximately 30% of Russia's high-tech military production capabilities are primarily concentrated within the bustling metropolis of Moscow and its surrounding strategically important Moscow region. Therefore, a substantial 1/3 of this critical high-tech output is specifically located in Moscow and the broader Moscow region, making it a pivotal hub for the nation's defense industry. That's why it's so important for us to break through and push past Russian air defenses. It's very difficult to do this because there are at least 2 blocking detachments in place. The first is the frontal air defense. It's very hard to break through. That's the Bryansk, Belgorod, and Kursk regions, and they're practically packed with air defenses aimed toward Moscow. And the second is the site-specific one in the Moscow area. So sometimes when we see reports saying that the Russians shot down 50 or 70 of our drones in the Bryansk and Belgorod regions, those were headed for Moscow. Mostly they're shooting down decoys that cost a few $100s, while the missile used to shoot them down cost tens of thousands of dollars. But nevertheless, some get through, and there was a strike in the Moscow region on one of the factories that produces circuit boards for electronics. As I said, this is high-tech manufacturing, and as a result, at least for now, the production cycle has been halted. Well, realistically, to actually reach Moscow, you need ballistic missiles. In other words, without ballistic missiles, we won't be able to break through Moscow's object-based air defense. Drones won't get through it.
Roman Grigorievich in the Moscow region, a microelectronics factory in Zubovo was attacked. There's a hole in the roof. The factory in Zubovo is a production complex that's part of the Resonit Technopark in the Moscow region. It specializes in manufacturing printed circuit boards, electronic and electrical components for various industries, including the defense sector. That's
exactly what I was talking about, yes. So they hit Resonit directly. The technological process has been halted. That's the most important thing, but it can only be destroyed with ballistic missiles. Well, even if a drone carries 50 kilograms, it won't be able to completely disable any military facility.
Roman Grigorievich, from a military standpoint, how many years would it take for Ukraine to develop ballistic missiles? Not just a few, of course, but to have them in mass production. How long would that take? 1,000 missiles per year? If we take examples from other countries that produce ballistic missiles?
Well, the thing is, Ukraine is a missile-producing country. Back in the Soviet Union, we produced several types of missiles with a full production cycle, starting from air-to-air missiles to ship-launched ones like the Kh-35 and Kh-35U, from which the Neptune was developed. That's actually an aircraft-launched anti-ship missile. So a ship-launched missile with an air-launched variant, we produced it entirely, the full cycle. There were several other missiles of this kind as well. And ballistics, we produced ballistic missiles, or rather cruise missiles, if you can call them that. The Kh-35U in particular was already at that level. And as for ballistics, we produced intercontinental ballistic missiles. The Satan SS-18, yes, manufactured by our Yuzhmash plant. That's 11,000 kilometers in range. You could reach Beijing and Pyongyang with it. So we still have the entire technological chain preserved. The technical documentation, the production system, very important mechanisms for certain tests, test stands, and of course the engineering staff. We were producing there. 10 years ago, we produced and launched the Grom, a whole complex that we built with $100 million invested by the Saudis, and we sold it to them as well. So that was just a few years ago. In other words, we have the entire production base for manufacturing ballistic missiles. It's not like we're starting from scratch. In order to launch, say, serial production of those same Groms with a range of 500 kilometers, we would need somewhere around $150 to $200 million and about a year and a half to 2 years. So if this government had started this 6 years ago, by now we could have launched serial production of the Grom 2-3 times over. If at this point we don't have this Grom, and we don't, because otherwise it would have already hit Moscow long ago, it means that for 6 years this government has just been dragging its feet. That's a big problem. The executive branch should have been sent to the armed forces of Ukraine a long time ago. I've said so many times already that the executive branch needs to be demobilized. You don't need elections or re-elections for this. It's in accordance with our constitution, within the legal framework of our laws, to replace the executive branch. Shmihal's team just isn't up to the task, absolutely not. Umerov, Shmihal, and all the rest of that Shmihal crowd are not in the right positions. They need to be replaced by professionals who know how to quickly launch, say, a ballistic program and how to restructure the country's economy for wartime. But that's an entire process. The work should be done by military personnel with basic military education who also understand economics, and we have enough people like that.
Roman Grigorievich, to sum up, Special Operations Forces destroyed a Russian decision-making center in the Kherson direction. The Russian headquarters in Makivka was also attacked. A video report of the HIMARS MLRS strike was sent to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, and everyone wrote that there were many killed and many wounded. The floor is yours.
Well, about Makivka, I'm actually from Makivka. I've been saying for a while now, why aren't we hitting their rear positions? So most likely our missile troops thought, let's not make Svitan curse at us, and decided to strike Makivka. The main thing is it was not far from my house, so the combat mission was accomplished, of course. Well done, the range allows it, and we have the means to strike. HIMARS work well at that range, and of course regarding Kherson, the so-called southern front, there's some serious Russian activity going on there right now. They're still at a crossroads. where to send the remaining reserves, either to reinforce the Zaporizhia direction, meaning the operations there, or to the right bank of the Dnipro near Kherson. So they still haven't decided yet, because the reserves that could have helped them in either direction, Putin burned through before May 9th, setting, well, unattainable goals, in other words, impossible tasks. So right now, at this moment, we can actually thank Putin for his complete idiocy in strategic planning, because it's precisely his idiocy, this political trap, that is giving us a breather now. We still have about 2 months before the next wave of reserves arrives. In these 2 months, we can give the Russians a hard time. Well, we'll see what exactly we'll give them a hard time for, and we'll talk about it in each of our reviews.
Roman Grigorievich, we're already at the end. The Russian armed forces have entered Yablunivka in the Sumy region, according to Deep State. That's 26 kilometers from the regional center. The gray zone has also expanded in Yunakivka, a village at the epicenter of the fighting. Please comment on this, it's very important.
Yablunivka and Yunakivka. Well, yesterday they said they were 20 kilometers from Sumy, and now it's already 26 kilometers. So does that mean they're having a negative advance or something? They've retreated 6 kilometers in the opposite direction. That's about where they are, somewhere between 20 and 30 kilometers. They're stuck there and will keep being stuck in that area. It's a small bridgehead, even if you look at it from the perspective of just the Sumy region, not to mention all of Ukraine, a small bridgehead that the Russians managed to seize by following right behind our retreating troops. That was a mistake made by our own politicians. Here, we were thanking Putin for his political decision. Here, it was the mistake of our politicians, who held our troops in offensive positions on the Kursk direction, almost to the point of disaster, practically to catastrophe. Then we had to run, because, you see, the politicians wanted to have negotiations with the Saudis from a stronger position, at the very least. Nothing came of it for them, but we had to flee from the Kursk region. And on the heels of our retreating troops, the Russians rushed into the Sumy region. But I'll say it again, this is about the same level as what's happening in the Kharkiv region. They're now in the area of Lipetsk and in the Vovchansk area. So they rushed in, and that's it, they got stuck. In the same way, the Russians will be stuck just around Yablunivka, Yanakivka, and so on. But nothing more. They won't advance any further. That is, on the one hand, there are serious fortifications there, and secondly, that's the first thing. Secondly, reserves have now been redirected there, and our troops have already recovered from this strategic failure of our politicians. They've already recovered, and now in some areas we're even regaining our previously lost positions, pushing the Russians back and advancing toward the Kursk direction, toward Tetkino, which is nearby, to the west. The Russians entered our territory and we entered theirs. Hvardiiske.
Friends, please like this video. Roman Grigorievich and I meet 3 times a week on my YouTube channel, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, to discuss the military and political situation. In the comments, write a few kind words in support of Ukraine and share your thoughts on Israel's special operation. Also, let us know where you're watching from. Share your location in the comments. The well-known military analyst Roman Svitan. Roman Grigorievich, thank you. And as usual, see you again on Monday.